Lego my ego, this is Illiterate. This week we are covering Netflix's Stranger Things. I am in the middle of checking out the new season 4 on Netflix. I'm hanging out with Taylor.
I looked into some conspiracy theory books, novels, nonfiction. Who knows what they are? We're going to figure it out.
This is a great time to kind of get into all things Stranger Things. Not going to be doing the obvious things, maybe so much the obvious influences of like Spielberg or so much Stephen King. We have episodes on those if you want to hear about those kinds of things and recognize some of the things that might bleed into Stranger Things. Go check out those episodes. Today, we're hoping to bring you a little bit more of the science fiction edge of things, the conspiracy edge of things, and the real development of this piece. Getting into the Duffer Brothers, and I can't wait to break it all down for you. Taylor.
Yeah, their names are Matt and Ross. They are identical twins. They wear different shirts, thankfully, for every interview. But I do not know which is which. And they are pretty connected as co-directors, finish each other's sentences, know exactly what's going on. In terms of them getting into the biz, they wrote and produced a film in 2015 called Hidden. Do you know anything about this?
I believe a buddy of my brother's did effects for it, but I don't really know much about it.
It's pretty small scope. I think when they were pitching it, somebody's like, oh, so it's all in a underground bunker. It's sort of a apocalyptic thriller with a twist. They were really interested in emulating M. Night Shyamalan. It had some snafus in production, I guess not on their end, but it did not get the wide release. And so it is difficult to...
Interesting.
And I saw a quote from an interview with them, and Ross, he said, at the end of the day, Hidden was a great experience because we know what it's like to fail and we know it will happen again.
Yeah.
Which I loved because I've failed several times.
Me too, man. You're reading that, I'm going, yep, there it is. My echoes in my chest.
Yeah. But nobody talks about that. They talk about, oh, wow, they hadn't really done anything. And then they got Stranger Things and it exploded.
I didn't realize it was that quick because Stranger Things is coming out middle of 2016. So
yeah,
that's a pretty quick turnaround from really putting down the sword on something. Going, we missed the mark, brother.
Yeah,
and then a year and a half later, you got something like this.
Yeah. In between, there was a TV producer who was working alongside M. Night Shyamalan himself on the TV show Wayward Pines, and they were impressed by this and got these brothers to help write on that show. So it did give them a secondary thing. And
it got them real M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, training them on how to do it. And so then this makes sense with, oh, they worked on a TV show. Now they're ready. They say, we want to do our own show. And really double down on what we're influenced by, which of course is the 80s. They pitched Stranger Things to 15 cable networks, and nobody liked it because of the dichotomy that it's grappling with, which they said either make it a kids series and don't make it so crazy, or drop the kids and make it like a Twin Peaks and focus on Hopper's investigation and make it an adult thriller.
Like this, people have never seen a Spielberg film. This is confusing. I mean,
right.
Most audiences are wanting something that can please both because it's possible. That's bizarre. It's like all things have a purpose in place. All of those things are good, but Lord, I think it's so obvious sitting on this side of it, going like, well, it's kind of the dynamicism of the ensemble that really gives you that warmness. It is all dynamics of it. The kids, I think, are probably the biggest reason of why people feel warm about it at all. So like, take the kids, and it's just a
grizzled
broken
old
sheriff and a lonely mother who, okay, but like that's a feature, and that's a different thing. I could see that, but like, you know what I mean.
For sure. For the cable networks, they want, and that was the thing with Netflix too, is they saw actually what they were trying to do and said, sure, do an 8-episode first season, because if you're going to be on cable, it's going to be 22 episodes, especially when it came out in 2016. And so they're like, we don't want to do that. We can't do that. This is really what we're envisioning, which you had told me off mic that the newer season really leans into the openness with the formatting.
Yeah, gone are the days of 22-minute episodes, 39, 41-minute episodes. This is entering into a new, really breaking down the door. When it comes to the last 10 years, there's this huge trend of blurring the lines between series and features. Everybody has been feeling it. Everybody's talking about series these days, and what makes a series is changed into looking more like movies. And part of this, and part of the ever-running battle, is runtime. Runtime's for everything. And then, so when you're in series, typically, I think the old Stranger Things, normal episodes, pretty normal runtimes.
Right.
This season, every episode is north of an hour. Every episode stands for one, is in the 70-minute mark, and the series finale will be 98 minutes, which is just a feature. So this is really breaking down the door of what these lines are that make the distinction between feature and series. And this is a huge property making a huge case here. This is really particular, and that means they're really on the forefront of what they believe is possible in the medium.
Well, and that's what's cool is looking into the impetus for them creating it. They were really looking at the 2013 film Prisoners, which I love. And
the Denis Villeneuve character,
and really looking at
the
moral struggles of a father's kid who is kidnapped, and they said, well, we'd be really interested to take this thing and expand it in 8 hours in TV form. So it is.
That's
are coming
so funny,
from,
actually, because when I was looking at ads for the new season, and it kind of hit me. I was sitting back thinking of what all the stories have been now, and this is the 4th iteration of this thing, and thinking about what all the stories have been compared to the first trailer I watched for the first season. And the first trailer, the first season, is about a missing child.
Yeah.
And I remember heavily throughout that season, it plays heavy on the grief of the mother, the Winona Ryder character. It's cut in a meditative fashion, so that you are missing this child that juxtaposed the absence of him. It's really, really important emotional stuff that has never returned to the franchise, to be honest. And I don't know how you recapture it, but I remember that as being one of the most grounding elements of the initial season, was that felt like a real missing child.
So the Duffer Brothers said that was where they were coming from. Although, like you're saying, with the grounded side, the more ungrounded side, they also wanted to introduce a childlike quality, which they said, well, what if the kid was taken by a monster? There's some sort of monster involved. And then they said, oh, that's the coolest thing ever, to have both of these things in play. And so I didn't realize that the original pitch, which they had the script and then this big 20-page pitch document, which has gone around Hollywood, if you're in the business forever, of like, oh, this is how you pitch a series. And now everybody just kind of copies the thing that they made to go to the studios with.
Yeah, it's become a template.
But they had originally pitched it as a mini series with a definitive ending. Like I said, this 8-hour TV format.
This makes me so angry, because this is what I want to
I know,
be. Ultimately, I'm always in the camp, end your story.
Yeah.
I love endings. I'll be on the picket line. I love endings. End your story. And without your ending, I just, as a storyteller, I hardly know what we're working towards. So that's just my soapbox. But I love hearing that.
Yeah.
I love hearing it, man.
Well, and it would be the definitive ending, the death of 11, going to sacrifice herself to save the world. They had it set up to be, this is just a miniseries thing. Came up with season 2 before they had even aired season 1, because Netflix knew, oh, this is going to go somewhere else. This is going to be a multi-season
This is going to
thing.
be huge, guys.
So they were really coy in interviews, as if they didn't know, when, of course, this was going to happen. But interesting to know that when they were first going around and nobody really wanted it, they were saying it's one and done as far as a season.
That's interesting too, because I've seen all of it up till now, and I thought that the back end, on the audience looking in level, the development of that story for season 2, the quality was really uneven, especially in comparison to how solid season 1 was. But I really did see a return, not quite as solid, but really a return to form for season 3. And I liked where they ended it in season 3. And I just wanted to be over. I just wanted to be over. End your story, please. But
well, they will.
you know, they
yeah.
will. I know they've just now kind of, I guess, said that that there will be one more. I've heard today that there will be one more, and that will cap off the series. There'll be one more season.
Yeah. One of the things that was interesting with the origin of them talking about where they came from and that it was going to be a one and done kind of thing in the news, and it only ended pretty recently in the last year or two, there was another guy involved, Charlie Kessler, because he had directed a short film in 2012 that was very similar and claims he pitched it as a feature in April of 2014 at a party at the Tribeca Film Festival and presented it all out. And maybe it was this sort of handshake contract. We'll talk more.
I heard this. Yeah, I did hear this.
Although what ended up happening was this guy Kessler withdrew the suit days before the trial in 2019.
Oh, wow.
And there was just a statement that he said documents from 2010 and 2013 in the deposition testimony showed that they did create it independently, and that's all he's going to say about it, and that's it. And it's kind of like, well, either he knew it was going to be way up against him, or because normally they say this is settled out of court. It didn't say that he got any money from Netflix and that he was owed anything. It was just that he said, oh, no. But it's also kind of like, oh, you're going to say that after it's an international sensation, you know.
Look, I could have trotted out my own short film. I made a short film that it has basically Elle's whole backstory out of season 2. I did that a year before Stranger Things came out. I should knock down there, bust him with a suit. No, I'm just like, no, this stuff has been out there. You know, like there's so many of these things barking up this tree. Firestarter is a big one. I've never seen it, but that was one that people were barking at me. Akira is a big one. That was another one I didn't watch until after I made my film. But, you know, this idea of the child experiment, the government facility. I mean, you told me, we were talking before off mic, you know, the entire Wolverine character is exactly what they do with Elle, you know, and that's exactly what I was trying to do in my film. So it's like these notions, these ideas, these big lofty ideas, MK Ultra and its influence, its indelible influence on our culture. These things have been floating around out there. So it's unfortunate that somebody would, you know, be that convinced or nefariously trying to convince others that somebody took it from them. But like, you know, as a creator, I go like, I look at it all going like, I was barking up the right tree, you know, you know what I mean?
Yeah, people are into this sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah. But it's a slippery slope. It's hard. I mean, it's because it's a business as well. But there's some stuff too where the brothers were like, people pointed this stuff out and we have no idea what they're talking about. We were not referencing because this is pure reference. Like you look at Stranger Things and it's nothing but 80s culture, 80s media, 80s language. It's everything. One of the things that
every 30 seconds.
Yeah. That they did say that was sort of odd, or I thought was cool, that people didn't pick up on the most was this anime series that came out in 2004 called Elfenlied or Elfenlied. It's a German word.
I think I've heard of that. Yeah.
It's this psychic girl, and the first episode, she breaks out of this facility. So classic stuff that we're talking about.
Hell yeah.
But there's a ton of gore and violence and psychological violence and related to it's like, is her reaction based on the atrocities done to her? Not is it justified, but it's kind of just like throwing a lot out at you.
Right.
So you had mentioned MK Ultra, and that ties well into the guy Charlie Kessler who had presented this lawsuit that they had copied him because the short film that he directed is called Montauk. And that was the name on this pitch document, which I'll post a link to, that they had put around. That was the original title. It was not Stranger Things. It was originally called Montauk, which is a place of great conspiracy and subterfuge and whatnot.
And this is so funny because I remember reading about this controversy after the first season came out, and I was like, he didn't I was reading about Montauk. I just
Yeah.
instead, all I did for my movie was say I don't want to be bound by any history, anything. This is an MK Ultra. It's my own deal. So
Yeah.
I, outside of any kind of government, bound reality, I just turned it into another reality. But like this guy thinking that like him pulling Montauk out of something was like like he owned that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's,
That's what I'm just like, this is ridiculous.
So what's funny too with them changing it for Stranger Things to a imaginary town of Hawkins, in a similar thing to yours, where it's like, oh yeah, we're not tied to any of this real stuff or having to explain if the town goes under quarantine. No, that didn't happen, and that kind of
Right.
thing. The big reason they changed was because of logistics, because they can't shoot in the wintertime on Long Island.
Right.
It's both miserable and expensive. And so a big piece of we got to find a better place to do this, because they shot a lot of it in Georgia.
Yeah.
So that was part of the name change. I looked into really what the Montauk Project was and whatnot.
Yeah.
Everything with a grain of salt. I am not an advocate of this, as we'll see. Kind of it's almost a like a fruit salad of every single conspiracy rolled up into one. And it's like, so even if one is slightly true, because of all the other stuff involved, it sort of brings into question.
Forever obscured.
Right. The book that I read, which I'll post a link to, is a 1992 book called The Montauk Project, Experiments in Time by Preston Nichols. And so his whole angle was that he was an electrical engineer who had studied all about this. He acquired equipment from the place after it was defunct, and he found out through some sort of psychological means that he was the technical director of this experiment and was brainwashed into silence.
Oh,
and
God.
Then all these other people are coming forward, said, oh, I was being experimented on, and I remember
As was
you,
I.
and all of that. Yeah, and they all said, so this would be between 1971 and 1983, and this is at Camp Hero, which was the Montauk Air Force Station on the very, very tip at the end of Long Island, which actually started, and there's some media connection to this, the situation that they're relating to this, what happened at this Air Force base, this secret camp base that was built to look like a fishing village, starts way back in October of 1943. And maybe people have heard this more commonly, the Philadelphia experiment, which is the disappearing ship in World War II. I don't know if that rings a bell, but it was like experiments to turn ships invisible to Nazis via radar.
Oh,
and then people said the USS Eldridge literally disappeared and then reappeared, teleported to Norfolk, Virginia, and then reappeared back.
Lord.
This is some of the stuff where there's reports that the crew was nauseous, or there was this sort of Cronenberg, like they were physically embedded in the bulwarks of the ships.
Oh, God.
Metal and really horrifying stuff. And where did the ship go?
The upside down ship.
Yeah, where it went through another dimension, and now,
oh my God,
and whatever. I found, because I'm always like, well, what happened? The ship was sold for scrap in the 90s, so you can't investigate it anymore. And there actually was a film that came out in 1984 called The Philadelphia Experiment, and follows two sailors who were on this ship when they did this experiment, but they jumped in time 40 years. So they appear in the 1980s.
What?
And I mean, there's a whole bunch of madness. I can't even explain it.
Oh my God. We are from the...
But so Nichols, this guy who said he was involved in this, he connected with this other guy, Al Bilik, who said he was actually involved in both situations, the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk stuff, because a wormhole sucked him and his brother into the future. He had watched this movie and it uncovered his repressed memories, and he had been de-aged and memory wiped, and so he and his brother were two sailors on the ship, and then they teleported through time.
People love movies, man.
Yeah.
I think people just love movies.
And he concedes,
this is incredible.
Yeah, he's like, it's pretty accurate to what happened to us. And we're actually, different souls in these bodies and whatnot. So that the actual Montauk experiment then, that Preston Nichols said he was involved in and was the head of and wrote the book on, focused more on mind control. And this is the children with psychic sensitivity.
Right.
And so he was like, we kidnapped them and brought them in for study. And so that's who these guys are, who then went from, because they opened some, I can't even understand any of the what actually happened with the time travel,
right,
teleportation. But Al and his brother Duncan were children in Nichols's experiments in the 80s, but they were also the sailors from the 40s. But his brother Duncan was the most psychic and could make objects materialize. And here, I just want to bring up some of the other stuff, like I said, that sort of maybe the government did take kids in to study them or whatever, but you have all of these other things and more people coming forward. And I'll post a link. There was somebody interviewed this other guy, Stewart, who said he was a kid who was brainwashed and whatever. And he said they sent him back in time to kill Jesus Christ.
Whoa.
But instead, he felt bad and just got blood from him on the cross and brought it back in a vial. And then Nichols said, oh, they were going to replace Duncan, this sailor brother's blood as a kid, with Christ's blood. And then they'd send him up to Mars and fly him back and say he's Christ, and then his blood would match the blood from the Shroud of Turin. So you can see how it's all coming together.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, that makes sense, Taylor. Right, yeah. Right.
As well as Nichols saying this is where they started the moon landing hoax with filmmakers, and they were testing flying saucer prototypes. They created the AIDS virus there, he was saying, and then Nikolai Tesla actually faked his death, so that's another conspiracy, and he was the true director of operations of the whole thing. Yes. How this all comes to an end, which finally ties back into Stranger Things, is that this Duncan kid, old sailor, unleashed this monster from his subconscious, which is a lot like the creatures from the Upside Down, which destroyed everyone in sight, and all the equipment was destroyed, and then there we are. They buried it in under hundreds of feet of cement underground. But it's a state park. Like, you can go climb the radio tower and go back there, and people are all traipsing around, and there's graffiti everywhere. And, people are saying there's these secret underground tunnels and whatnot. So, I don't know. Yeah.
That's fascinating. A ton of that is obviously fodder for what ends up in the genre pieces of the show.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what they were pulling from.
Beautiful.
And I
mean, a lot to go on, man. That's why I love story, man, because you just get to forget about the truth and if it's all muddy, blah, blah, blah. You get to jump right in the middle of it and go, yes.
Yeah.
And that. And we're jumping time dimensions and transport to Russia. And
yeah. Yeah, and it's government conspiracy and all that.
Yeah.
I'd seen, just for some balance, there was another guy, Joe Lafreno, who has a steady girlfriend. He has kids. He's worked at the state park for like 18 years and went through some hypnosis a few years ago, because it is a legitimate medical thing that you can do. Some people even think when you meditate, it's kind of a hypnosis. And he said all these memories came flooding back of when he was a kid, not all the creating AIDS and flying saucer and stuff, but he said he was abducted and abused at this military facility. And so, that's where it's kind of like, perhaps they grabbed some runaway kids from New York and were doing experiments. I don't know. I'm not.
Well, at the same time, we have to. Okay, it's a grab bag of conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
It's a grab bag of all the science fiction, all of it. But at the same time, as we uncover on this show, things come from somewhere. That the beginnings of all of these things are rooted in some sort of happening, a story. Now, in the midst of all of the crazy, obviously, we're not really endorsing any of this.
Right. Yeah.
But we can go as far to say that, the government has done some stuff. And perhaps there's an element of truth running right through the middle of all of it. That I would absolutely go as far as willing to say that's what opens up the ideas for everything else. And then at the same time, that's what muddies everything to make the truth forever obscured. Because if the government was trafficking children and like trying to build a super soldier, I mean, like, good Lord, that would be the most guarded secret on the face of the planet. Like, so
yeah. I had heard a great quote today. Take it whatever you want from it, but it was like 50% of everything is actually true. The hard part is figuring out which half.
Right. There we go.
Yeah.
You know, so this is a blast to hear it all, and then just everybody making, because you're doing it right now, making your own kind of calculation as to what you think may be part of that truth. What is that thread of truth running through the whole part of it? I love looking at all of it, putting it out on the table, and then you haven't seen what pops out at you. What could be real about this? Where does that come from? When you chase these things down, there you get down to certain stories, and you wind up in some places where, like, wow, that sounds like that could have happened. And then you also sound up in, like, well, we are from 1948, and we were also the kids in the experiment from that. You know. So you can wind up in both places. You just have to be deciding which place is the real place.
Yeah,
like you said.
Yeah, or the quote about mythology, where it's like all myths are true and some of them actually happened.
Exactly. There we go.
And so it's like, there is something quite like we're talking about in the culture of a kid being experimented on, military neglect and lack of oversight, and then craziness, and then it affects a small town. It's like that's been done over and over because there is something mythological to that feeling of control or lack of control that gets people going.
Like something happened, Montauk. MK Ultra is a absolutely real thing documented in history, most of which is lost forever, but there are some parts of it on the record. Some parts of it are knowable, so we know that at some extent there's the possibility for some of these things, and that's where as a creative you find opportunity for story, and that's what these guys have found in the middle of all of this nonsense. They were able to take a lot of noise and filter it through and give you this Spielbergian journey. While pulling on all this interesting, earthy, pulpy, gritty conspiracy stuff, you get to bounce that through a refracting surface like a Spielberg nod, and you wind up with something really, really interesting, really, really really, really of its own color.
And bringing a lot of stuff back. Like I saw there was an increased demand for, you mentioned it in the opening, but Eggo waffles blew up.
Right.
Which Kellogg,
I like them frozen. I'm a frozen man. I just
really?
pull them right out of the freezer and right as they are. I'm insane. I like them all ways, but I'll just go through them frozen.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're coming back. But all the this is one of the craziest merchandising properties, and it is of a serialized streaming show. Like, it's crazy, and all the things that has tied into. That's part. Eggo has gotten a boost off of all of these things. Trucker hats are just like
I saw Coke re-released New Coke.
Right,
because it came out in '85. Schwinn re-released the retro bikes that all the kids ride, which sold out within hours.
Right,
tons of stuff that it's bringing back where people are like, oh, that's cool. I want to copy that. Yeah, it's pierced every bit of culture.
Gosh. Yeah, it really has. And I think maybe today we've touched on maybe why that is. It gets to play in all these different playgrounds. It gets to use those refracting surfaces to bounce off all of this interesting, pulpy conspiracy stuff. It gets to use that 80s light, that 80s neon, if you will.
So what do you all think of it? Do you enjoy it? Do you want 17 seasons?
Right.
Would you have wished it was a miniseries like Evan? Yeah, reach out to us at IlliteratePod on Instagram or illiteratepod@gmail.com.
If you want to see my short film, the Roma Project, it's in our show notes under my little link. My portfolio is there.
Check out the links to other episodes, other things similar to this that we've covered.
Give us a like, give us a subscribe. It always does more than you know. We really appreciate the support. And we appreciate you listening this far in the recording. And we will catch you next week.